Welcome, chess enthusiasts. Today, we're diving into an intriguing match that showcases the beauty and complexity of strategic play. We'll analyze the opening moves, key tactics, and pivotal moments that shape the game. In this encounter, we'll see how both players navigated the early stages, establishing control of the center and developing their pieces. As we break down each move, I'll highlight the players' strategies, mistakes, and opportunities, providing insights that can help you elevate your own game. So, grab your boards, and let's get started. Whether you're a seasoned player or just starting out, I hope you find valuable lessons in today's analysis. Let's jump right into the action. Pawn to e4. White opens the game by moving the pawn to e4, establishing control of the center and allowing for quick piece development. Pawn to e5. Black responds by pushing their pawn to e5, contesting the center and preparing to develop pieces. Knight to f3. White develops the knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn and further controlling the center. Knight to c6. Black develops their knight to c6, reinforcing the pawn on e5 and influencing the center. Bishop to b5. White plays bishop to b5, pinning the knight on c6 and indirectly putting pressure on the pawn on e5. Pawn to a6. Black challenges the bishop, asking it to choose between retreating or capturing the knight. Bishop to a4. The bishop retreats to a4, maintaining its position and continuing to influence the center. Knight to f6. Black develops the knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn and preparing to castle. Kingside castling. White castles kingside, ensuring the safety of the king and connecting the rooks. Bishop to e7. Black develops their bishop to e7, preparing to castle and reinforcing the knight on f6. Rook to e1. White places the rook on e1, supporting a potential push in the center and increasing influence on the e5. Pawn to b5. Black expands on the queen's side, pushing the pawn to b5 and forcing the bishop to retreat. Bishop to b3. The bishop retreats to b3, remaining active while observing the central and dark squares. Pawn to d6. Black solidifies the center by playing d6, reinforcing the pawn on e5 and preparing for further piece development. Pawn to c3. White plays c3 to support a central d4 pawn push later and provide a retreat square for the bishop on b3. Kingside castling. Black castles kingside, ensuring the safety of the king and connecting the rooks for future operations. Pawn to h3. A preventive move by white, aiming to give the bishop on b3 an escape square while also preventing potential threats from black's pieces. Bishop to b7. Black develops their bishop to b7, aiming at the center and preparing to support future central pawns or pieces. Pawn to d4. White pushes the pawn to d4, challenging black's center, opening lines for the pieces, and striving for central dominance. Rook to e8. Black places the rook on e8, supporting the e5 pawn and preparing to challenge any central advances from white. Knight to d2. White develops the knight to d2, connecting pieces and preparing to reinforce the center or redirect the knight to more effective squares. Bishop to f8. Black retreats the bishop to f8, perhaps to reposition it or prepare for further center control. Pawn to a4. White pushes a4, preventing black from further expanding on the queen's side and potentially preparing to open lines. Queen to d7. Black moves the queen to d7, allowing the rook on a8 to connect or potentially preparing to support the a file. Pawn takes b5. White captures the pawn on b5, opening lines on the queen's side and creating weaknesses in black's position. Pawn takes b5. Black recaptures on b5, maintaining material balance and re-establishing pawn structure while keeping threat avenues open. Rook takes a8. White captures the a8 rook with their rook, gaining material and placing more pressure on black. Bishop takes a8. Black captures the rook on a8 with the bishop, restoring some material balance while keeping the game tense. Pawn to d5. White advances the pawn to d5, aiming to gain space and open lines while pushing black's pieces back. Knight to a5. Black moves the knight to a5, targeting the weak pawn on b4 and seeking active play on the queen's side. Bishop to a2. White retreats the bishop to a2, maintaining pressure on the knight and keeping an eye on the center. Pawn to c6. Black pushes the pawn to c6, reinforcing control over the center and preparing to possibly push forward with d5 or develop the pieces. Pawn to b4. White expands on the queen's side, preventing further pawn moves from black while trying to create weaknesses. Knight to b7. Repositioning, black moves the knight to b7 to reroute and reinforce the central squares. Pawn to c4. White pushes c4 to challenge the knight's position and open up lines for the pieces. Rook to c8. Black places the rook on c8, controlling the open file and preparing for dynamic play in the center. Pawn takes c6. White captures the pawn on c6, creating a passed pawn and opening up the position. Queen takes c6. Black recaptures on c6 with the queen, restoring material balance while threatening white's position. Pawn to c5. White pushes the pawn to c5, advancing the initiative and aiming to disrupt black's formation. Knight to d8. Black moves the knight back to d8, perhaps to reposition it for better activity in the center. Bishop to b2. White develops the bishop to b2, targeting the central squares and eyeing a potential attack against the black king. Pawn takes c5. Black captures on c5. White attacks cs, further opening up the position and creating tactical opportunities. Queen takes c5. Black recaptures on c5 with the queen, maintaining control and aiming for counterplay. Bishop takes e5. White captures on e5 with the bishop, attacking the queen and opening lines. Black knight moves on d7, improving his position. Bishop to b2. The bishop moves to b2, increasing pressure and influencing the center as well as the potentially weak king side. Queen to b4. Black moves the queen to b4, challenging the bishop and looking to maintain activity. Knight to b3. White relocates the knight to b3, solidifying control over key squares and preparing to support future advancements. Knight to c5. Black develops the knight to c5, looking to place pressure and enhance control over central squares. Bishop to a1. White moves the bishop to a1, aiming to reposition and enhance the activity of other pieces. Bishop takes e4. Black captures on e4 with the bishop, regaining material while threatening potential weaknesses in white's position. Knight to d4. White moves the knight to d4, centralizing it and increasing pressure on black's position while putting the knight on a strong outpost. Knight to b7. Black relocates the knight to b7, reinforcing the control of the center and preparing to reroute the knight to more effective squares. Queen to e2. White develops the queen to e2, connecting the rooks and preparing to support potential central and kingside operations. Knight to d6. Black advances the knight to d6, targeting the c4 pawn and increasing activity on the king side. Knight takes c5. White captures the pawn on c5 with the knight, opening up lines and putting pressure on black's position. Queen takes c5. Black recaptures on c5 with the queen, maintaining material balance while gaining control of key central squares. Queen to g4. White shifts the queen to g4, preparing to create threats against black's position, particularly targeting the knight on d6 and potentially eyeing the king side. Rook to e8. Black moves the rook to e8, reinforcing the e-file and preparing for potential counterplay in the center. Rook to d1. White develops the rook to d1, aiming for control of the open file and supporting the knight's advance. Bishop to g6. Black positions the bishop on g6, targeting the knight on f6 and potentially preparing to create threats on the king side. Queen to f4. White centralizes the queen on f4, increasing pressure on d6 and preparing to support further attacks on black's position. Queen to b4. Black moves the queen to b4, applying pressure on the knight at c5 while maintaining control over the central and queenside squares. Queen to c1. White moves the queen to c1, potentially preparing to support the knight on c5 and reinforcing control over the open files. Bishop to e4. Black centralizes the bishop on e4, targeting the knight on c5 and aiming for increased activity and control of the center. Rook to e1. White places the rook on e1, supporting the queen and enhancing control over the e-file. Queen to a5. Black moves the queen to a5, putting pressure on the knight and threatening to disrupt white's pawn structure. Bishop to b3. White develops the bishop to b3, both protecting the knight and preparing for potential future threats against black's position. Queen to a8. Black positions the queen on a8, threatening the a2 pawn and looking to create threats on the queen side. Queen to b2. White counters by moving the queen to b2, defending the knight on c5 and increasing pressure against black's position. Pawn to b4. Black advances the pawn to b4, challenging the knight on c5 and attempting to initiate tactical play on the queen side. Rook to e3. White moves the rook to e3, aiming to double up on the e-file and potentially support further advances. Bishop to g6. Black develops the bishop to g6, targeting the knight on f6 and preparing for possible counterplay. Rook takes e8. White captures the rook on e8 with their rook, exchanging into a favorable material position. Queen takes e8. Black recaptures on e8 with their queen, maintaining some activity but facing increased pressure from white's coordinated pieces. Queen to c1. White shifts the queen to c1, possibly preparing to support the knight on c5 and exerting control over important central squares. Knight to e4. Black centralizes the knight to e4, putting pressure on white's position and targeting key squares. Bishop to d5. White develops the bishop to d5, challenging black's knight on e4 and looking to gain tempo by attacking the queen. Knight to c5. Black moves the knight to c5, attacking the bishop on d5 and increasing overall pressure in the center. Knight to b3. White retreats the knight to b3, defending the bishop on d5 while trying to maintain the knight's influence. Knight to d3 and resignation. Black centralizes the knight on d3, targeting white's pieces and looking for tactical advantages after this move. White recognizes that their position is untenable and decides to resign. Thank you for joining me in this exciting match. Today, we witnessed a dynamic battle filled with strategic maneuvering and tactical opportunities. Both players showed great skill, but in the end, Black's positional play and effective piece coordination led to a decisive advantage. The move nd3 not only placed pressure on White's pieces but also highlighted the importance of central control in chess. It's always fascinating to analyze the decisions made at each step and to consider alternate moves that could have shifted the outcome. I hope you enjoyed dissecting this game as much as I did. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth chess analyses and content. Let me know your thoughts on the game and if there are any specific matches you'd like to see analyzed next. Until next time, happy chess playing.